10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. We have ignition.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to Kerbal Space Program RP-0. We are starting the day off joining our Mars landing system as it makes its transit away from Earth and on its way to Mars. It will need a correction burn, which is what we are trying to sort out here because the moon got in the way. Yeah, somebody's getting a strongly worded reprimand based on that. And because we don't really know how the moon's gravity is going to affect our telemetry, we're just going to try to take a quick guess here, bring ourselves in a little bit, and then probably plot some nodes to see what our result is going to look like after we get through with this very unintentional flyby. Because, yeah, it does end up pulling our course by quite a bit. So we're going to get out of the moon and Earth's SOI and then plot another node because it looks like we were not, in fact, going to go to Mars. Thankfully, this is a pretty light course correction coming in at something like 250 meters per second, for which we'll probably use the main engine. But we've got that all plotted out. It's just a 12 days away, so we've got some time to deal with other things. Namely, the crew of Chestnut here in Venus orbit is time for them to deploy their little surface lander, because we haven't done anything like that for a while. It was supposed to go to a polar biome, but based on our orbit and where our perigee is, that is not looking very likely. We're still going to go for it, but first, engineer Alan Elliott is going to go on EVA and start to commission the spacecraft and get it ready for flight. This means attaching all of the various scientific instruments that we hope to put down on the surface. I think a few of these have already been landed on Venus. I know a few of these have already been landed on Venus. We've been there more than a few times, but we just want to, make sure, and we're really hoping that we can set this down on a new and interesting biome so that we can collect some new and interesting science. We won't be able to run it through a lab. It'll have to basically just go straight back to Earth, but hey, that's fine. Every little bit of science we can collect is just a little more money in our pockets at this point because, well, we are rounding the final corner on the tech tree. Finally. It's only taken 5.5 years, but we are coming up on that auspicious day when we can declare every single tech node researched and done, and, check that off our checklist of things to complete for this series, I guess. So, with all the instrumentation attached, we will decouple our little lander. It does have its own descent stage, although for some reason those engines are not responding to much of anything. It says that we have no connection, which is really because we did not deploy the antennas on the Chestnut itself. But we are working pretty hard to bring our periapsis down to something a little more reasonable, which it shouldn't matter so much because we are going to do an inclination change, but we're just going to go ahead and these thrusters have pretty much the same ISP as those 1 kilonewton thrusters that we have attached on the base. So whichever one of them we use doesn't really matter at this point. So with the primary fuel tank depleted, we're going to jump back over to Chestnut, however, very briefly, and get the comms set up because, that's useful. And then come back to our little lander here, ditch the external fuel tank, and get it ready for its inclination change maneuver, which will hopefully also lower our periapsis down to something where we can start making aero braking passes. But it would be a shame if we weren't just to not stop and admire the view for just a little bit. We do have very limited battery life on board this spacecraft, so we do have to try to remember to angle it into the sun as best we can, especially if you're going to walk away from the keyboard for a little bit and leave it in time warp while we get ourselves set up. Fortunately, this is also very close to the orientation that we will have to have when we are making our aerobraking passes. So we will switch back to Chestnut now, which is also going to be making an inclination change maneuver. It needs to line itself up with Ostrich Station so that it can begin to think about making rendezvous. I mean, finally, they have been stuck aboard the spacecraft for 227 days now, and about 35 of them have been in Venus orbit, just kind of, you know, admiring the view, I guess. I'm sure they have some very important things to do, but most of them are getting back to Earth on time to satisfy our crewed Venus flyby contract, which is funding a lot of things right now. So we have officially renamed this little lander VPE for Venus Polar Explorer, which was optimistic at best, but, you know, have a goal in mind, everyone. And we are going to try to make as much of an inclination change as we can, although, once again, it doesn't really matter a whole lot because our periapsis is near equatorial. So unless we are able to shift that periapsis after we get our orbit low enough, we pretty much know where we're going to come down, and it's going to be, you know, somewhere around the equator. So we are setting up for our first aerobraking pass with a periapsis altitude of 118 kilometers, which should be right around good enough to just lower that apoapsis by just a smidgen. It didn't even snap off our antenna, and then, yeah, brought us down to 317 million meters. Sorry. Cut our orbit near in half, but we are rudely interrupted by our Mars descent, or our Mars landing vehicles, descent and ascent, needing to do its 250 meter per second correction. So we'll lean into this a little bit by ullaging the thrusters before trying to light up the HG3 main engine. There is the warning, and there's a successful light of that HG3, and looks like we're a little ahead of schedule, but 6.4 meters per second left on the clock. We're going to touch up the rest of this on RCS. Plenty of RCS fuel, I hope, because we won't really have a chance to refuel this thing until we can get it to the station, and we want to preserve as much of this as we can, because the less aerobraking we can do, the better. And that looks like a pretty dang good intercept. We'll give ourselves a solid node and take a quick gander at how much it's going to take to put us into a capture orbit. And the answer is about 1.2 kilometers per second. And if we're really good about stuff, we have 866 meters per second left on our delta upper stage here. And then I'm thinking we'll try to aerobrake the rest of it, but that remains to be seen. We still have a couple of months before we're going to have to deal with that. So we will jump back once again to our Venus Polar Explorer, which is probably going to end up nowhere near the poles, but we're still kind of hoping. And unfortunately, we did not get oriented in time. We did not get connection in time, I don't think. Or I forgot to unlock a fuel tank. Take your pick to reorient ourselves to avoid burning off our primary antenna. We still have our secondary, which should be good. And now that we are very briefly in comms range, we're going to get ourselves set up to try to gather some scientific data, because it looks like we'll be making at least one more pass on this. The bad news is we're over a predictable biome, one that we have visited many times before, and don't actually gain any science of much significance. I think we got 144 science points off of that, which, well, might not seem like a whole lot currently, but, well, just you wait and see. So now on our third consecutive pass, we've got our comms set to deactivate appropriately, still coming in at about 118 kilometers. That aerobraking pass goes very smoothly. We've gotten our apoapsis down to 146 million meters before we step into our fourth pass, which goes fairly well. I don't think we got a whole lot of braking off of that, but we're really kind of doing this as passively as we can, just to conserve as much fuel as we can, which unfortunately leads to us going nose first into next pass and burning off a small portion of our equipment before we're able to reactivate our RCS and orient ourselves accordingly for our next pass, which our periapsis has been lowered to 78 kilometers. This is a descent. Our parachute is armed, and there's a heat shield taking a massive brunt. But it does survive. The spacecraft, mostly intact, begins its primary descent through the Venusian atmosphere. These tend to take a very long time. Our primary chute deploys, slowing us down to about 15 meters per second, and we still actually have most of our ablator left. We probably could have done many more aerobraking passes before our primary chute fails and sends us spiraling down at about 23 meters per second, but not to worry. There is our backup chute, bringing us down to about 6.6 meters per second as we get into this final bit of our terminal descent, and we are in fact flying over Venus's canyons, which, should we touch down, would be a biome that we have not landed in yet. And the opportunities for science here are extremely valuable, but unfortunately, as we come out of this, pop. Yes. Surveyor core failed due to aerodynamic stresses. Moving at 6 meters per second was apparently just too much for the poor thing to handle, and it crumpled under the pressure before it could touch down. No valuable data was radioed back, unfortunately. So we will jump back to Chestnut, which is just going to go ahead and make a burn for broke to try to make its rendezvous with Ostrich Station. We get about 4 kilometers per second left in the tank, and that is increasing by a little bit here and there because we've just burned off so much of our thruster fuel. So without ever even attempting to make an aero brake pass, which has been our modus operandi on the 2 previous Venus missions that we have brought out here. The 1 previous Venus mission. This is only Venus Crew 2. My mistake. We will just fire the main engine and bring ourselves down to a nice braking orbit, and then repeat the cycle again after retooling the node to try to rein in our closest approach distance. There it is. We've already got it to less than 1 kilometer. We'll try to touch that up on RCS before going ahead and making our rendezvous. Now, our difference in speed is about 68 meters per second, so this will require yet another ignition of our main engine, which, of course, overdid it just a little bit. So we're going to have to tap into our reserve fuel. This is the fuel tanks that we normally keep for docking, but yeah, like I said, I overdid it just a little bit. So we will now bring in the solar panels and start to make our final approach to Ostrich Station. I'm sure this crew is super thankful to not only replenish supplies with things that are very stale and have been on station here for well over a decade, but the chance to like stretch their legs and use the workout equipment and the other very nice things that I'm sure this space station definitely has, and that weren't cheaped out on during its like 5th attempt at launching. Now, unfortunately, we are initially trying to go with the aft docking port here. Yeah, Chestnut outmasses the space station with this much fuel still on board by, I would say, at least 40 or 50 tons. So each one of these little nudges just kind of sent the station into a new and fun spiral. Now, we'll just say that the onboard correction system and the onboard computer for Ostrich Station was doing a pretty good job of trying to correct for that as best it could, but unfortunately, we're just having one hell of a time trying to get hard dock on this aft port, which I thought would be the easiest because we'd be pushing against the axis of Ostrich Station that has the most mass, as opposed to pushing at it from the top where our other docking ports are, which would be a whole lot easier to induce a spin if you get it wrong. And if you've ever seen any of my dockings, you know that I usually get it wrong. So at some point here, some thruster control got locked open and Chestnut started accelerating away from Ostrich Station. This was about where I was able to finally start the live stream from last week. So we're now officially covering 2 weeks worth of live streams. Congratulations. And well, we corrected for that and we're able to throw it reverse, get ourselves kind of somewhat lined up before we'll pivot in for this, I guess, top side docking port. And yeah, now that now that people were watching, I was certain I was going to be doing even worse than before, but we just decided, you know what, we're going to take it nice and slow and get things super easy and just be very gentle because, well, we have to. We are running dangerously low on RCS propellant, and so we don't have much choice. We do have options. If we run out, we can undock one of these Charlie supply pods docked to the other two docking ports, full of spare fuel and refuel things, but fortunately we don't have to. First approach, nuzzled the noses, and it's docked. So jumping back to the Space Center now and checking on our current timeline, it looks like we are almost at our window to do a Neptune, or a Jupiter to Neptune gravity assist. These are a few missions that we built out the last time, or last episode or so. So we're just gonna make sure that some of those are rolled out after I realize that I've forgot one or two launches that were supposed to go to Mars. Oops, yeah. I guess there will be no secondary supply crawler for this Mars surface mission, but you know what? I'm okay with that. If we can just get a crew on the ground for the first time since like the 80s, I think we'll be okay. But here's the big thing. That is our last tech node, and we have just unlocked it. There were no parts in it. It's going to take time to like research or whatever, but there it is. There's the completed RP-0 tech tree. This is truly, truly a historic day. So, with our Jupiter to Neptune gravity assist coming up, we decided that it's probably a good idea to do something atmospheric at Neptune besides just our origami glider, which chances of success, yeah, somewhere between slim and none, whereas a direct descent vehicle with sacrificial RCS ports might stand a slightly better chance of being able to radio some data back to us during its initial descent. So we're just going to go super basic on this. 2 surveyor cores, a heat shield, some RCS, a long-range comms, short-range comms, parachutes, and every scientific equipment thing that we can try to wedge on board to this. And because time is of the essence, we've got about 31 days before this launch window closes. We're going to go with an RA9. We have enough parts of these sitting in storage to just roll one out like every week for the next 25 years. It does need some upgrading though, and we can certainly use some of these upgrades to get a little more Delta V out of the platform, namely by upgrading our avionics packages and removing unnecessary ones as needed, and just making sure that all of our engines are at a higher tech config. We did upgrade the RL-10s, but the RD-270M and the E1 engines on the boosters in the core stage are about as good as they're going to get. We'll get that into production. It'll take about 22 days, but jumping just ahead, we do have this DN6 Delta, which is the first mission to launch on this Neptune via Jupiter window. Since I keep getting it backwards, we'll just roll with it. And this is, of course, carrying one of our Triton Surface Explorer missions. These are identical to the ones that we have sent successfully to Ganymede, unsuccessfully to Callisto, Europa, and Enceladus. So, you know, it's got a 1 out of 4 success ratio, but it does have a gob of Delta V. And it's RTG powered, it's got long range comms, we know it can do the job. We had some spares sitting around. They were very quick to build, relatively cheap, so to speak. And we're pretty sure they're up to the task. So the DN6 booster has completed its trip putting this into orbit, and the Delta upper stage is freed from the core and ready to make its transfer burn. And turns out, yeah, this transfer sucks. Of course it does. It's a pretty bad transfer to Jupiter in that we have to go past Jupiter and then fall back in, which, you know, less than great, but we are at the very first week of the window. I figure if we wait another 2 weeks or so, maybe we can get a more ideal launch plane to do this, but yeah, it doesn't look too great as far as our timeline is concerned. We do, in fact, get the assist between Jupiter and Neptune, but it's not a very good one, and I'm having a real hard time like trying to dial it in and figure it out, and it looks like the fastest transfer I'm able to get is something like 17,000 days, which is a real long time. I think that would possibly set the record for the longest running space mission ever, even when you consider Goer 2, which ran from like 1965 until 1999. So the course is set. We're just going to take it because we cannot leave this Hydrolox-powered HG3 Delta upper stage in low Earth orbit for more than, just a little while without significant boil-off of Delta V. And so we're just going to, we're just going to go for it. If it's 17,000 days, it's 17,000 days. We do have a secondary backup mission of this exact same spacecraft type queued up also. It was actually due to launch next, but I think we're just going to hold off on that one for a little bit and see if we can't get maybe a more efficient transfer. But the Delta upper stage completed its burn, and we are now on the experimental lander engine fuel as we're trying to correct for my screw-ups of very poorly executed maneuver nodes. So we're trying to plot a node about halfway between Earth and Jupiter to try to dial this in just a little bit to make sure that, one, we keep that Jupiter flyby and get that gravity assist, and two, that we can keep this mission on course. Of course, we can. It's still going to be 17,000 days, but, well, good luck to you, sir. That's going to do it for this one, everyone. Thank you so much for hanging out. I really do appreciate it, and I will see all of you in the next one. So until then, see you later.